Chapter 17, page 234. Monday morning, I went down to the courthouse with Maxie. We were both dressed in our best church clothes. Maxie looked really good in that yellow dress she was wearing, with her hair pulled up in a clip. We waited in the hallway for the judge to call us inside. Maxie slipped a hand into mine, and I jumped a little. "Other things aside," she said quietly, "I need something to hold on to." I squeezed her hand. "This is for Bucky," I said. "We're all he's got. For Bucky." I concentrated on how nice it felt to hold her hand again and began counting the ridges on each of her knuckles, anything to keep from thinking about why we were there. I wondered what was going on through Maxie's mind. The bailiff stuck his head through the door and called out, "Miss Maxie Brown?" Maxie stood up and went over to him. "Here," she said. The bailiff escorted her inside, and she turned her head toward me as she passed through the door. I nodded and smiled. After what seemed like an eternity, the door reopened. Maxie emerged, and the bailiff right behind her, and I tried to catch Maxie's eye, but she turned away from me. "Mr. Samuel Childs?" I took a deep breath and went inside. The tall doors thumped shut behind me, and I expected the courtroom to be huge, but it wasn't. Still, the walk to the witness stand seemed to stretch for miles, and I followed the bailiff down the narrow aisle, and my eyes on the nightstick dangling from his belt. I imagined everyone in the room staring at me, but I didn't look around to see for sure. The bailiff stepped aside to let me pass into the front of the courtroom. I raised my eyes to the judge, who peered down at me through enormous eyeglasses attached to a chain around his neck. I stepped into the witness stand and released my nervous breath and faced the court. There was Bucky sitting between Clive Billings and Eric Richmond. Several Panthers were in the audience, Stick among them. He appeared strong and confident as he nodded encouragement to me. I tried to hold my shoulders tall like him, hoping I would look strong too. A few other people sat scattered through the pew-like rows, perhaps reporters, a man with a sketch pad. He moved his pencil swiftly, glancing up at me from time to time. Father was there, sitting next to Mama, across the aisle from Stick and the Panthers. He wasn't supposed to be out yet, but he wouldn't hear of me testifying without being here. I wished his presence could make me feel better, but I worried that I wouldn't live up to what needed to be done. He would be disappointed. I snuck a look at the jury, all men except for 2 women, all white, a jury of Bucky's peers. I held my breath to keep from laughing or crying out loud. Did they have it in them to give Bucky the benefit of the doubt? Maybe one of these men was a mechanic at least. Maybe one of their fathers had died, and they know what it was like to provide for a mother and sister while you were only 18. The bailiff thrust a Bible in front of me. Over his shoulder I met Bucky's eyes. He stared back, but his look was hollow, lacking any of his usual spark, hopeless. I had never seen him stand so still, or so long, without a smile. It was as if the end had already been given, and what I was here to do didn't matter anymore. I raised my right hand and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. "How do you feel?" Maxie said later. We were back at the Panther apartment, alone except for the guards in the hall. We had returned a couple of hours ago and collapsed onto the couch next to each other. Stick was working in the auto shop, and Raheem and Leroy stayed at the courthouse where the jury was deliberating, and I looked at her. "When you were up there," she said, "what did it feel like?" "Like it wouldn't be enough," I admitted. "I'm not sure they believed me. The jury had probably made up their minds before the trial even began. It had happened 1,000 times to people we knew. I didn't really know how to hope that things wouldn't work out for Bucky." Maxie nodded. A tear slipped out of her eye, and she brushed it with her knuckles. I lifted her hand from her face. "What's wrong?" She lowered her head. "No, it's just what you did for Bucky. What we did. It means more coming from you." I tried to hold my shoulders tall like him, hoping I would look strong too. A few other people sat scattered through the pew-like rows, perhaps reporters, a man with a sketch pad. He moved his pencil swiftly, glancing up at me from time to time. Father was there, sitting next to Mama, across the aisle from Stick and the Panthers. He wasn't supposed to be out yet, but he wouldn't hear of me testifying without being here. I wished his presence could make me feel better, but I worried that I wouldn't live up to what needed to be done. He would be disappointed. I snuck a look at the jury, all men except for 2 women, all white, a jury of Bucky's peers. I held my breath to keep from laughing or crying out loud. Did they have it in them to give Bucky the benefit of the doubt? Maybe one of these men was a mechanic at least. Maybe one of their fathers had died, and they know what it was like to provide for a mother and sister while you were only 18. The bailiff thrust a Bible in front of me. Over his shoulder I met Bucky's eyes. He stared back, but his look was hollow, lacking any of his usual spark, hopeless. I had never seen him stand so still, or so long, without a smile. It was as if the end had already been given, and what I was here to do didn't matter anymore. I raised my right hand and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. "How do you feel?" Maxie said later. We were back at the Panther apartment, alone except for the guards in the hall. We had returned a couple of hours ago and collapsed onto the couch next to each other. Stick was working in the auto shop, and Raheem and Leroy stayed at the courthouse where the jury was deliberating, and I looked at her. "When you were up there," she said, "what did it feel like?" "Like it wouldn't be enough," I admitted. "I'm not sure they believed me. The jury had probably made up their minds before the trial even began. It had happened 1,000 times to people we knew. I didn't really know how to hope that things wouldn't work out for Bucky." Maxie nodded. A tear slipped out of her eye, and she brushed it with her knuckles. I lifted her hand from her face. "What's wrong?" She lowered her head. "No, it's just what you did for Bucky. What we did. It means more coming from you." "Hey, 2 is still better than 1. I touched her chin, and she smiled. "You probably said it better than me anyway." Her smile deepened. We did everything we could, right?" she whispered, turning her face up at me. I couldn't think past the tears in her eyes. I leaned into her and kissed her, forgetting that I wasn't supposed to anymore. Our lips touched, and I pulled back. Maxie gazed up at me. "It's okay," she said. "I want you to." And just like that, we were back. I leaned toward her just as Raheem burst through the door. "Not guilty," he yelled. "The verdict is in. Not guilty. Can you believe it?" Maxie and I jumped up. "Are you serious?" she said. I could only stare at Raheem. "Yow!" he whooped, and he scooped Maxie up in his arms and twirled her around. "Bucky's coming home, girl." "Heem," she cried. "I can't believe it." She hugged him and lowered her to the floor. She turned to me, a huge grin on her face, and we kissed. "Okay, break it up," Raheem said a few minutes later. "That's my sister, you know." I quickly stepped away from Maxie. I chanced to look at Raheem and expected a glare, but he was smiling. He nodded to me ever so slightly, and I remembered he wanted us together. "Come on, Sam, my man." He moved toward the door. "We gotta get Buck." "I'm coming too," Maxie said. He pointed to the desk. "Someone has to stay and make the calls." Maxie shot him a look. "And I guess that's the girl's job." "You got it, little sister," Raheem chucking under her chin. Maxie looked at me, and I shrugged. It wasn't my call. I hardly got to go anywhere either, so I wasn't going to mess up my chance by crossing Raheem. Maxie narrowed her eyes at me and scooped up the calling list. I might be worse off for crossing her. "Maybe she should come," I said. "I'll help make calls later." "Don't start," Raheem warned. "I didn't want you to come either, but Bucky asked for you." He walked out. "Don't say I didn't try," I said to Maxie as I trailed him out the door, and she made a face. Downstairs, Raheem was unlocking Leroy's car. He pulled 4 shotguns from the back seat and held 2 out to me. "Trunk." I hesitated, and Raheem raised his eyebrows. My fingers closed around the neck of each gun, and I thought of Father. Did I really do the right thing by not promising him, by leaving him to worry about me every minute? I frowned. Raheem shrugged. "It's Bucky's day. No guns." Okay, I placed the guns carefully on the floor of the trunk. Bucky wouldn't want them up front. We went to Roy Dack's to tell Stick the news. Stick and Roy both came bursting out of the garage as Raheem pulled in, honking madly. Raheem and I exchanged a glance. "Not guilty," we yelled out the windows. Stick nearly fell over. We jumped out of the car and went over to him. "I can't believe it." Stick clasped his hands with Raheem. He turned to me. "You did it," he said, hugging me tight. "You did it." His praise filled me up, and I didn't know what to say. We're going to get him now," Raheem said. "Can you come?" We all looked at Roy. The other man sniffed. 4 hours to go on your shift, and you're asking to take off?" "No, sir," Stick said quickly. "Not at all." The wrinkles on Roy's cheeks shifted as he rolled his mouth a few times. "I suppose it won't hurt to let me lose one evening's help," he said. He patted Stick's arm. "Go get your boy. Bring him home." "Thanks, Roy," Stick grinned. "I'll make it up this time." Roy waved his hand. No, go on now." We returned to the car, and Stick maneuvered out of the coveralls as we drove. "They're all yours now again, Buck," and he murmured, tossing them into the back seat. "Where's my coat?" "In the back," Raheem said, and I handed Stick his jacket and beret. He picked up Bucky at the courthouse, and he jumped into the back seat with me and tapped the back of the passenger seat where Stick was seated. "Get me out of here," he said, smiling.
"You got it, brother," Raheem said, and then whooped loudly, honking the horn as he pulled into traffic. The rest of us followed suit, cheering, stomping feet, and pounding doors. All right, Sticks said, waving a hand. "Leroy probably wants his car back in one piece." We stopped the frantic celebrating, but everyone was jubilant. Even though we wouldn't have admitted it out loud, our wildest dreams, we never thought that Bucky would have been acquitted. "I think he'll be happier to have Bucky back in one piece," I said, nudging him with a fist. Bucky caught my neck in the crook of his elbow and knuckled my hair. I couldn't believe how skinny his arm felt against me. "Hey, I knew you missed me," he said, and then his tone turned serious. "Thanks for standing up for me. You don't know—" "Hey," I said, brushing off the thanks, even though the words reached deep inside me. "Of course." I met Stick's eyes in the rear view mirror. A crazy, awkward gladness filled me. Maybe finally I had done something right. Raheem launched into a funny story. From time to time, I caught Stick studying me in the mirror, and we would laugh together in a way that we had never had before. When I wasn't concentrating on Stick, I watched Bucky. The spring was back in his movements, and his eyes twinkled as he grinned his toothy grin. There was an edge in his laugh, though, a hardness that I figured was left over fear. He would be back to normal again before long. Bucky always bounced back. That was his life. We laughed harder than I can remember doing in a while. Everything had seemed so heavy, so serious for such a long time. Something great was happening here, between me and Stick, between me and Bucky, between all of us. I could barely believe that I had been a part in making it possible. We had almost made it back to the neighborhood when the lights flashed and the siren bleeped at us. "I always knew you had a lead foot, Raheem," Bucky said. He half smiled as he was still joking with us, but no one laughed. I caught Raheem's worried glance in the rearview mirror, and my stomach tightened. "Look at the speedometer." Let's stop there. "I always knew you had a lead foot, Raheem," Bucky said. He half smiled as he was still joking with us, but no one laughed. I caught Raheem's worried glance in the rearview mirror, and my stomach tightened. "Look at the speedometer," Raheem said to Stick under his breath. "I see it. Just pull over. It's worse if you don't." Raheem eased the car into the shoulder of the road. I peered out the back window. Both officers emerged from the squad car and approached us, pistols drawn. One came up to Raheem's window. "Is there a problem, officers? I believe I was driving below the speed limit. License and registration. Move slowly." Raheem removed his license from his wallet and handed it to the officer. "And registration?" the officer said, nodding. Stick lifted his hand to the glove compartment. He flipped the latch and the little door fell open. The gun. It was still sitting there, where Leroy had shoved it when we had raced away from the demonstration. I'd forgotten all about it, and from the way he jerked his hand back, I could tell Stick had too. "Gun!" the cop at the window shouted. He fired 2 rounds. The explosion of the sound started me shaking. Bucky clawed his fingers into the seat between us, letting out the air in a desperate sigh. "All of you, out of the car," the cop screamed. "Now!" The shot still echoed in my ears. My heart thumped as I opened the door and Raheem got out of the driver's seat. Bucky did the same, and I was halfway out of the car when I noticed Stick hadn't moved. I looked over. His hand fell away from his chest and a pool of red in his palm. The cop was shouting at me to get out of the car, to keep my hands where he could see them. My fingers curled around the top of the half-lowered window. "Stick," I said. He turned his head toward me. The look in his eyes said everything. Raheem's hands were on me, pulling me away from the car. I fought it. "No!" "On your knees," the cop said. "Hands in the air." "Stick!" I screamed, straining against Raheem's grip. "They'll shoot you." Raheem spoke into my ear. "Do you hear me? If you go near him, they will shoot you. Get on the ground." The cop waved his gun at us. Raheem squeezed me tighter. "Do it," he said as he released me. He dropped to his knees beside me, and Bucky was already down. A trembling calm came over me as Raheem moved away. I stopped screaming and stood still. The cop motioned to me to the ground with a jerk of his hand, and behind him stood his partner, a gun still pointed toward the open window. I didn't look at the car or at Stick. Instead, I just looked at the cop as I kneeled in front of him. The naked hatred in his eyes struck me deep. He was ready to kill me. "Sam!" Stick's soft call tore through me. Through the open back seat door, I could see into the car. Stick was sitting in his seat, his head turned towards me, and I had to get to him. I lifted one knee off the ground and put my foot down. Sam, no, Stick whispered. On your knees, the cop shouted. I had to get to Stick, but I couldn't. It's my brother, I shouted. Please, on your knees, or I'll shoot. I dropped my leg, never tearing my eyes from Stick. He was just a few yards away. I could see the blood running out of him, spilling over his hands and onto the car seat. He leaned against the headrest and closed his eyes. Stick! His eyes opened, zooming in on me. I'm sorry, I told him, mouthing the words. I felt sick inside, but Stick seemed calm, so calm. It was strange. It's okay. It's going to be okay, he murmured, closing his eyes. Stick, I shouted again, and he didn't open his eyes. Everything became still. The air, my body, the entire world around me, the horror transpiring in front of me suspended for one disbelieving instant. Until then, I have never known anger, the kind of coiling rage that slid sharp enough through my gut. I'd never known how much a moment could hurt. Face down on the ground, the cop yelled, but I was stuck, my eyes locked on Stick, and the cop stepped closer, cutting off my view. In my mind, I was leaping forward, lunging at the cop. My fingers clawed out his throat, our hands grappling together for control, and our bodies strained to learn who would live and who would die. The urge was so alive within me, I had no idea what force would be keeping me still. The cop grabbed the back of my head and shoved my face into the pavement. That was real. The tiny pebbles scratched my cheeks and nose, and I choked on the smell of tar and rubber. The handcuffs squeezed cold and tight against my wrists, and I pinched my eyes shut. I tried to close my ears to the sound of the sirens and the voices of the cops. A stream of what-ifs flooded my mind, but it was too late to change anything.